Hello, today we're going to build a sorcerer for the Daggerheart open beta gaming system. We're going to start the character at level 1. We're going to take it all the way through level 10. We're going to build this character for damage. We're going to make sure that we add area effect damage, crank up our single target damage. And by the time we get to level 10, this sorcerer is going to be one of the most damaging characters that you can build in this game, at least so far as I've calculated. While also being nearly unkillable and almost indestructible in combat. It's pretty crazy how strong this character can get. If your GM's running a level 10 one-shot and you use this character, there's a pretty good chance your DM won't like you afterwards. So let's talk through it. We're going to combine the sorcerer abilities with a selection of really strong domain cards. They get 2 really strong domains in the sorcerer class. We are going to use strength as a secondary skill. There's adversaries in the game that are able to restrain characters. We need mobility with this character. We need to be able to position ourselves. In some cases, we're going to be able to affect all close enemies. So we really need to be able to move a little bit and make sure that we can get as many enemies as possible within that range before we trigger our area effect spells. If we're restrained, being held down on the battlefield, that's not going to work. So we can take strength as a secondary ability, and on adversaries that have restrained, a lot of times it'll say strength 14, strength 16 to break this restrain, and that'll get us mobile again, and we'll be able to move around the battlefield. It'll also allow us to do feats of strength outside of combat. It gives another layer of flavor to the character, which we like. For Ancestry, there's a lot of different ancestries that are good. Firbolg, I almost picked Firbolg. When you see how much stress we're going to be throwing around in this character, there's a very good case for Firbolg, because every time you can avoid taking a stress, it just gives you more fuel to do more good stuff. This could also be an opportunity to use the Galapa for armor, but as you'll see once we get through the build, we don't really intend to use armor that much. You can play a demon for fear management, but we're already going to have tons of stress sinks as a sorcerer. Goblins and halflings are just good. If you don't want to play the ancestry that we picked, really, you can pick a goblin or halfling for any character you play in the game, and you'll be rewarded for it. But for this particular character, we're going to go with Drakona, the dragonborn of this Daggerheart system. Using their breath weapon requires a hope, so it's a place that we can always use hope if we need to. If we build up too much hope, or if there's a good, like let's say a group of really small enemies, we can get in there and breathe on them and do a bunch of damage. So it's nice. It's a good skill. It's a D8 damage, and in this game, wherever you see a damage type that doesn't have a specific number of dice, then proficiency can apply. So your elemental breath will scale with proficiency. We'll end up at 6 proficiency eventually. And that'll be 6d8 damage. And this is going to be great for the whole game as a generic area effect. There's area effect spells that we can get through the domains, but this is an area effect that we don't have to use a domain card for. And later in the game, when you have to choose between your domain cards, you can only have 5 cards active at any time. You start getting the high-level ones, you have to get rid of some of your low-level ones. And it's nice to have this ability on our character. So for the purposes of this build, we're going to pick a green dragon, green Drakona with an acid breath weapon. For the community, the best community would be Seaborne. This character is going to have quite a bit of synergy with insight rolls. Insight goes well with detecting lies and finding hiding places. Those are kind of things that you do with insight anyway. And Seaborne gives you insight on those checks, so it's adding another d6 to things that you're already good at for virtually guaranteed success. So that, I would say, is the best thing to take. But for the purposes of this build, I'm actually going to take Seaborne. I like the idea of my dragon being a sea snake type dragon, you know, a swimmy type character. I think it's just more flavorful. The Seaborne is good. When you take your long rest, you get an extra action. And we're always going to have to clear our stress. This character will be maxed on stress all the time. They'll have to de-stress at every short rest, every long rest. So doing that and having, 2 other actions to clear your hit points and clear your armor, whatever you need to do, or if you want to do some crafting. So I think Seaborne is quite useful for this character. I think Slyborne is statistically, if you just want to do the best math, Slyborne is the best. But Seaborne is what we're going to go with for flavor with this character, and it still works quite well. So to give this character a little personality, I like the idea that, sometimes there's a person or a Drakona that's, an admirable person, very, let's say, strong-willed, attractive, whatever you want to say, but not very likable. Right, so we're going to dump presence, and we're not going to be a very likable character. We're going to be that character that tells the truth no matter what. So my images of this dragon-type character walking around, staring down everybody, has a really good insight into what people are thinking. She knows what they're doing. She kind of has that, stare right through you kind of stare that you really can't hold her gaze. And, when talking to the local official who's giving you a job and not telling you the whole story, she's the kind of character that will just look at the official and go, "You're lying. We're going to have to get more for this contract because you're not telling us the whole truth." And everybody's going to, the party's going to be like, don't say that. Like, I could just imagine that, scenarios playing out like that. So we're going to play this character like a little bit aloof, arrogant, just goes wherever she wants, says things that hurts people's feelings because she really doesn't care. So that's cool. Also, as an arcane caster, there's some opportunities here to manage your role play around your attacks. We'll talk a bit about more of that later. So Raisa 2-star, going to be a damage dealer, and we'll be using stress to do a lot of damage. We'll have strength as a secondary stat to avoid being restrained. So now the personality's kind of coming together. We're going to be a primal origin sorcerer. There's a ability that says when you target something with a magical attack or a weapon attack, you can use a stress to do a second target. And from everything that I can tell, when you pick that second target, you roll dice once to get your attack value, apply that against both targets. You roll once for damage, then you apply that to both targets. That's important later on. We're going to talk about some stuff later on that it's important that that's the way it happens. If the GM at your table rules that it's 2 separate rolls, you got double the chance to generate fear, to fail, all of these things, then this becomes less good. But the way it's written, you make 1 attack roll, 1 damage roll, and when you spend that stress, that attack just targets 2 things instead of 1. You also have the ability to use a stress to extend the range of your spell by 1 category. And things like Preservation Blast knocks everything from melee back into far range. In the game, you'll have 1 character in melee with you. Sometimes it's hard to even get 2 characters in melee with you. So this spell isn't really that good. But with the ability to extend that range by 1, you can send things that are very close out to far range, and with very close being, a card distance, short edge of a card away, I think it will be shocking how many enemies you can get into that radius in a combat. 3, 4 enemies, maybe even more if you can move to exactly the right spot. So adding 1 stress with this primal origin, really every ability that's in there is useful, and it doesn't say that you can only use the stress effect once per turn. So in theory, you could drop a stress to get +2 on the attack roll, drop a stress to make it target 2 targets, drop another stress to re-roll dice. You can, it looks like, use it all at once. And this allows this character to, have a Nova turn. In this game, things are pretty flat. If you haven't watched my video on the math and statistics, there's a lot of reasons why this is true, but it's really, burst damage really isn't too much of a thing, but with a sorcerer, it can be. All right, so stats, we're going to take instinct as the main stat, of course. We're going to take strength and agility. Strength to break free of any restraining, and agility to help us move around the battlefield. We're going to dump knowledge or dump presence. Either one is fine. Dual staff is a two-handed weapon that does instinct attack at far range. So this is great. And when we use this to do damage, we can drop a stress to target a second target. It takes two hands. The starting rules let you pick a secondary weapon whether you want it or not. So pick a tower shield. If you get pinned down somewhere where you think you might be getting hit, I don't know, maybe there's a reason why you want to pull out a tower shield and just have more armor. So it's something that you could take as a secondary item. There's not really a weight limit in this game that says, you know, you're carrying a tower shield, so now you're encumbered. Those rules don't seem to exist, so you could just have a tower shield if you want one. If you want a different secondary item, you know, just pick whatever you like. For armor, I would go chainmail to start. Sorcerers actually have a pretty good evasion, 9 evasion, which is nice. Chainmail does cost you 1 evasion, which we don't really like that much, but having that 7 points of armor with the thresholds that we have with this character is going to give us more opportunities to occasionally reduce the damage by 2 instead of just 1, whereas a breastplate will only reliably get us a 1 hit point reduction. So we take the chainmail with the character, and you know, hey, Drakona looks pretty good in chainmail. We got a scary green Drakona here in chainmail, looking pretty spiffy. So it feeds into it. Once you get an advanced breastplate, something that has 7 or more armor, you can switch armor. We're not going to talk too much about armor with this character because we don't really plan to get hit much. Inventory, pick what you like. Domain cards, we're going to take Rune Ward. That lets you stay alive early on. You can put some dice on there that help you reduce damage. So it's like a minor form of armor. You would just put it in yourself, help keep yourself alive. And then you got Wall Walk. It's utility. It's nice for sneaking into position. The Sorcerer basic spell that does damage is pretty bad, to be honest. You mark a stress to recharge it, and you put a number of dice on it equal to your spellcasting trait, and then use those dice to make an attack at some point later. I believe in the playtest Matt Mercer said you can just recharge it anytime you want, and it's not an action. It's just something that you can do. But it takes a stress to do it. And if you look at your character at level 1, you could have a weapon in your hand that does a D8 plus 2, and you could spend a stress to target 2 targets. A D8 plus 2 is equal to roughly, let's call it 7 damage across 2 targets. So you'll do 1 or potentially even 2 hit points of damage to 2 targets. If you have 2 dice, it's 2d10, and you activate this spell the first time you use it, it's free. You're going to average 11 damage. It's less than your weapon. I'm sorry, it's more than your weapon, but it's less than you would get by targeting 2 targets with it. Since you have to use a stress to refill it, we could say each one of those circumstances causes a stress. So that sorcerer basic spell isn't really doing anything more for you than your base weapon in terms of how much damage you're doing. But maybe once a day it gives you 1 extra hit point, and then forever after you got to spend the stress anyway. So I don't like it. When you get to level 2, you're going to take proficiency. Then your staff is doing 2d8 plus 2, which is an 11 average damage. And this spell will get a plus 1 because your spellcasting trait will go up to plus 3. So then you have 3d10, which is going to be 16 on average. So again, it's slightly ahead. But remember, with the dual staff, you can do 11 damage to 1 target and use a stress to make that target a second target with your sorcerer ability. So that's going to do 2 hit points of damage to 2 different creatures, which is, I think, going to be better than, spending a stress and not really being in the range to get a 3rd hit point done on most tier 0 and tier 1 characters. So I don't know, I really, statistically, I don't like the spell. I don't, unless there's some way in the game that later on you get your spell casting trait jacked way up. I just don't think it's worth it. In terms of experience, we can have experience that are relevant to combat damage. From what I understand, anytime you want to spend a hope, you can add these if you can tell a story as to why your experiences relate to what you're doing. So if you're making a combat roll and spell sniper is your experience, I would think you'd be able to do that in combat and get that bonus to your attack roll. So we're going to do that. There may be cases where we're going to want to activate this. And as the second one, I took Eagle Eyes. Maybe that's a perception thing, just helps you see things. And then at level 2, we're going to get take an experience called Slither. And we're going to say that our dragon is again a Seaborne dragon, and maybe that means we're kind of a little more snaky than most Drakona. And we're going to use this Slither. And maybe it's agility and movement rolls, but maybe it's also breaking free of restraint using strength. You can make an argument when you're moving across the battlefield that you could slither to do that better, and you could make an argument that when you're trying to get out of a grapple, something that's restraining you, slithering makes that easier. So again, it costs a hope to use it, but we'll take this as a skill and we'll plan to buff it up and plan to make it good. At level 2, we're going to take proficiency and we're going to level up the instinct and strength traits. Those are our main and secondary stats. We're going to take Cinder Grasp. This is, again, statistically not a very good spell. It is capped, so it tells you how many damage dice you can use, so proficiency doesn't apply. It's good for boss monsters at early levels because if they don't get rid of the burning effect, once they're burning, they take 2d6 damage every turn at the end of their turn, which is more or less a hit point. For some bigger monsters, it's a stress, but still it's good attrition. If you can do it in an early round and put them on fire and make them take that damage for several more rounds, that's pretty good. So it's nice to have, but other things that we get are going to very quickly outscale it. 3rd level, we're going to take another evasion, and we'll take stress and the Veil of Shadows. This allows you to make a wall of shadows between any 2 far points on the battlefield. So if you draw a circle and you take one far point and just draw a line to any other far point, you can carve up the battlefield in very interesting ways. Typical combat, I've seen this used quite a bit. You have some melee frontline characters, and then you have maybe a wall or a barricade or something like that with some archers behind it. And the archers get to shoot for free until you deal with the front line, and then go back to the back line. Or your casters have to deal with the back line and put them to sleep, whatever. There's a bunch of tactics here. But it's a very simple combat scenario. Well, if you got the sorcerer, you just make a spellcast 13 roll, put up the Veil of Shadows. Nothing can see through the wall but you. So now the archers have to come to the other side of the wall. Well, if you draw it between 2 far points, really far down in that circle, so that the archers are way behind the wall, and the wall's like almost in melee range with where your melee characters are, they have to walk right into combat to see anything. Again, this spell is low-key broken. It just divides up the battlefield. It's like a wall of force, which is a very powerful spell in D&D, but you get this thing at 3rd level. So it's pretty crazy. It's meant for rogues so that they can put up the wall and they get advantage to anything that they can see on the other side of the wall. So it guarantees that your rogue can use their sneak attack whenever they want. But then when used with a sorcerer, it's completely different. You just wall off the battlefield. You can nuke the stuff on the other side of the wall and it can't see you. It's really powerful. 4th level, we're going to take experience. We're going to level up. And we're going to take that the original trait that we had for the spell sniper. and we're going to level that up, and we're going to level up Slither. Those are the 2 experiences that we're going to keep maxed out. The Spell Sniper to help us in combat if we feel we need it, and the Slither to help us in all kinds of fun ways. In 4th level spell, we're going to take Preservation Blast. This allows you to take any character that's in melee, deal damage to it, and blast it out to far range. Again, we can drop a stress and target everything within very close range. You increase your range category by 1. So you can blast everything within very close out to far range from where they originally were, right? So they'll go to far range from where they were. And again, if you put up the wall, you can potentially blast things right out of range and put them behind the wall, and then they have to spend a turn getting back to you through the wall. They can't see where you're at. The GM may play that in different ways. Maybe it doesn't affect the monster at all. It remembers where you are and just goes straight back to you. But anyway, the Preservation Blast, area effect scatter to far range that you can upgrade the range of the spell itself. Again, in most circumstances, when you can only hit 1 or 2 things, it's not that efficient. But for those combats where you can get 3 or 4 characters in the range of that thing and knock them all out to far range, it's going to feel super powerful. So let's talk about gameplay. At level 1, all the characters in Daggerheart are going to feel similar in power. I've looked at this several different ways. When you build a level 1 character, everything's going to feel roughly the same power level. This character is going to be a little more fragile than most other builds. The moral of the story is just try to stay away from the monsters. You may not be able to do it. Maybe your tanks will take care of it. Who knows? But generally, you don't want to get hit. You're not a tank. You're not going to get out to the front line unless you absolutely have to. That'll change later. We will become an engine of death past level 8, and you won't have to worry about this anymore. But, for now, stay back and stay behind the rest of your party when you can. Once you hit level 2, the damage starts to kick in. You're going to attack with the dual staff. We'll have an extra proficiency here, and we'll spend a stress, target 2 enemy with far reach. And we're going to be able to do, generally we're going to try to do 2 hit points to 2 different characters. This ability, I think, is awesome. It really gives you some role-playing room to move. I love characters like this that get a ranged attack that you can describe it however you want. It doesn't say what that looks like from your dual staff. It's just a magical attack. So, 2 points of light flicker in the sky, turn into magical stars, and then streak down and strike 2 targets. If they miss, they come down, they strike the ground, they kick up the dirt and burn a big hole in the ground. That could be pretty cool, right? Or let's say you like more of a chaos feel to your stuff, and these 2 glowing skulls come out of your staff, and they just whiz around every which way, but end up hitting the target, by some chance. So they're just these flying skulls that are completely chaotic and unpredictable, and just like a firework or a balloon or something like that somehow manages to directly hit your target with magical damage. Or one that I like, my daughter and I play Dungeons and Dragons, and with her Eldritch Blast, we use this one where the magic latches onto the soul of the enemy, and the spell is actually trying to rip the very essence of the person out. And for her, she came up with this idea that you see silvery mist, but instead of a projectile going from you to the enemy, instead you see the silver mist come out of the character toward you as you try to rip the soul out of their body. So there are so many cool ways that you can play with this description of how your magic works with 1 beam or 2 beams or whatever. And I think that's a cool and fun thing to do. So already at very low levels, you've got a spell that can divide up the battlefield. You've got this twin hit mechanic that you can use 1 stress to target 2 enemies. And whereas most characters are going to be doing 2, maybe 3 damage to an enemy with 1 hit, you'll reliably be doing 2 damage to 2 different targets for a total of 4 hit points of damage every time you want to spend a stress when you act. It's really strong. And there won't always be 2 enemies, and you won't always want to spend the stress. but this character already feels powerful. The Veil, again, just make a wall, seal off ranged attackers, put casters behind it. If they need line of sight for their spells, they're out of luck. And then Preservation Blast, can potentially knock things behind the wall. It's just silly. And then we do have to remember, we've got this elemental breath that we can use to clear groups of small enemies. So if we have these group enemies, a bunch of little skeletons are all mobbed up and charging at you, you just go up there and breathe on them, and as many targets as you can hit, take that damage, 2d8 damage. And a lot of those characters only have, 1 or 2 hit points, and once you start killing them, some characters that are minor minions, even like when you kill one of them, it deals 1 damage to another one. There's group mobs that do less damage at half strength. So this character is going to be really good at, paring down any of these combats that have a bunch of little stuff. Just with your Dragon Breath, which uses a hope. It doesn't even take a stress, right? You use a hope to activate that. So it's nice. It's a fun character so far, right? Out of combat, we have all of this insight stuff. We can know what our shady employers are up to. We can be a lie detector for the party. There's all kinds of role play here for insight. Feats of strength as needed. We can use, I called it Unstoppable Stride. We referred to that to slither. So we can, slither away with a wagon or pull down a door. That's for feats of strength, if we can find a way to describe it. So in these early levels, this character's a scary dragon. I imagine her with very little sense of humor, just sort of staring people down, being not very likable, and dropping the bombs in combat. All right, level 5, 6, and 7, the next tier, once we get the upgrade, we'll take a skill experience called Leap of Logic. Maybe it'll help solve puzzles. Again, it's going to be sitting at +1 for the rest of the game, so we kind of don't care what it is. Just pick something for flavor for your character. Proficiency and traits at level 5. Again, statistically, those are the best things to do with every character you ever build once you hit a new tier. So we're going to take them. We're going to take the Phantom Retreat domain, and we're going to get rid of Cinder Grasp. Again, Cinder Grasp was always, probably not our favorite thing to do anyway. So Phantom Retreat, a bunch of fun stuff you could do with Phantom Retreat. We'll talk about that here in a minute. At level 6, we take another proficiency, get our proficiency up to 4, and we're going to level up those experiences, because again, the things that we want to do with our experiences, if we're going to activate them, we want it to be worth it. At level 6, we'll take the Dark Whispers, and we'll take that to the Vault. That allows you to speak into the mind of characters that you know. And there may be a scenario where you're sneaking in somewhere and you need to communicate. There's scenarios where this could be just absolutely a game-changing thing for you to be able to communicate with somebody through their mind. Communicate messages telepathically. It's a zero cost to bring in. When something's in your vault, you can spend stress to swap it out with an active card. And this is a 0 stress card. So if you need it and you have it in the vault, 0 stress to just bring it out, put it active. You kick one of your other good things into the vault, but you can take those out at a short rest and swap them back out. So this is a really nice utility domain to grab to be used in a circumstance where you need it. Then level 7, we're going to upgrade the subclass. I'm not really impressed with the middle subclass here with Sorcerer, but the final level, the mastery of the subclass, we definitely want. So here at level 7, we're going to go ahead and upgrade our subclass, and I think we could take Evasion. There's a lot of stuff that we could do here. I think adding another stress is probably good. We're going to be maxing out our stress a lot, I have a feeling, so we'll add another stress to be available. We're going to take the Arcana Touched here, and then we have to get rid of Rune Ward. We have to be careful from now on, because Arcana Touched will only stay active as long as we have, more Arcana than we have other domains. So we need 3 Arcana out at all times. And if you need to pull out the Dark Whispers, you try to replace a Midnight skill with that when you need it. But if you deactivate Arcana Touch because of Dark Whispers, just make sure you trade them back out again at your next rest. Arcana Touch gives you +1 to your spellcasting rolls, and it has the ability that once per short rest you can swap the die results between hope and fear. And that's going to be really good for a reason we'll discuss later. To be continued. All right, so gameplay 5 to 7. Once we get our 4th proficiency, our staff damage is going to be 48. And let's say we've upgraded to an advanced staff by now, so it's D8 plus 4. So we'll get 48 plus 4, which is 22 damage across 2 targets if we want to spend that stress. And at this level with tier 1, tier 2 enemies, even some tier 3 enemies, we're not going to hit severe damage with this, but we should pretty reliably be able to do 1 or 2 damage. And if we do, even if we only do 1 damage, because we're able to do 1 damage to 2 different targets, and they would have to be tough targets to do 1 damage. Most of the time we're going to get 2 damage across 2 targets, which means this character's fairly reliably doing 4 damage. There's other ways to do this with other characters. I'm planning to do builds for characters that can do that with melee weapons. But it'll be harder to get 2 targets in melee or very close range. But this character can do it at far range, which means it'll be pretty reliable to get 2 targets. Far range is a pretty big circle on the map. All right, so we want to get a blood staff. This is something you'll want to talk to your GM about. If the GM allows you only 1 magic item on the sorcerer and you're playing like a 1-shot at level 6 or something like that, make the blood staff your item. It's an insight weapon. It has far range, and there's a huge drawback to the weapon, which is if you deal damage with a weapon attack, you must mark a stress. In return for that, your damage die is a d20. So if we go into combat clean with this character, it's a hard combat, and let's say there's 3 enemies, and all 3 enemies are... when I think of combats, I think of a combat that has a bunch of little guys. That's one type of combat. A combat that has 1 big boss, you're fighting a dragon. That's a different type of combat. And then there's something in between where, in my opinion, you fight like 3 or 4 mobs that are bruisers. They're all pretty big mobs with extra abilities, things that trigger off of fear. You have to fight 2 or 3 of them, and they're not quite boss mobs, but they're much better than the average mob. And that's where you're going to just go crazy on your first turn. So when you use the blood staff, you can do d20. We have 4 proficiency. That means 4 d20. We're going to average 42 damage when we hit with this thing. At this level, that's going to pretty routinely be 3 hit points on one of our targets in this tier. And even if we can only hit 2 targets for 2 damage, it's still 4 damage, and we probably couldn't have hit those targets for 2 damage with our dual staff. So we're going to take the stress, we're going to trigger these big d20s, and we're going to drop a bomb. Now, if it's like 2 elites and they're really big, and we think that they have a high difficulty class, you can use a hope to trigger that spell sniper experience, and we're going to get another +4 at this point to our roll. Remember that the sorcerer says you can drop a stress to do +2 on the attack roll, so we could add +6 pretty easily to our roll, and we're going to roll a 13 average anyway. We're going to be adding our trait to that, our insight attack to that. So at this level, you're looking at a +4 there. So you're looking at potentially +10. And if you roll 13 on average, 23 is going to hit anything in the game at this point. So the idea is you could use hope, trigger your experience, use stress, get another bonus, drop the bomb. If you roll low on a couple of these d20s, trigger your reroll dice. Once you trigger a reroll, your average damage has the potential to go up to 52 average damage instead of 42. But you'd spend like 3 stress and a hope for a guaranteed hit against 2 targets for 3 hit points on each target. And you're only rolling 1 attack roll. So there's only one chance for you to give the GM fear, and you only generated one action token in that sequence. So this is the best nuke that I could think of so far with the different character builds I looked at. But it does require a blood staff, and it does require a commitment of quite a lot of resources. But then you just drop the hammer on two things and get the combat half over with. Some of these characters only have 7 hit points. So if you hit each one for 3, the combat is half over in one round. One action, even. And besides that, we really have a ton of options, right? We have Preservation Blast to knock things around. We have the Elemental Breath to breathe things. We have the Veil of Shadows to control the battlefield still. And then this Phantom Retreat. You spend a hope, you set your point, and then at any given time before your next short rest, you could spend another hope, and you'll go back to that point. So there's, like, let's say that you're visiting a castle and somebody says this is an impenetrable vault, whatever, you know. You could set your set point inside the vault, and then later that night just go back in. The problem is once you activate it, the spell is over, right? So you would get into the vault, but then you'd be stuck inside the vault with not much way to get out. The other way that you can use this is to set up a retreat point. So you make a camp a mile outside of town. You go into town, use your wall walk, use your deception skills, whatever you need to do, get into where you're going. And then imagine Indiana Jones. He sneaks into the temple. He's about to pull that thing away. He's got the bag of sand ready to go. The alarm's going to go off. The rock's going to roll. The natives are going to get angry. Whatever's going to happen, right? But instead of doing all of what happened in Indiana Jones, he simply grabs the bag, teleports a mile away, and he's sitting at the campfire with all of his buddies. Done. Out. So I think this is really, it's really interesting. It's flavorful for out of combat. There's all kinds of stuff that you could get up to. Basically, it's a get out of jail free card. You could use it for combat, but I think if you're constantly spending hope, it takes 1 hope to activate it in the first place and a 2nd hope to use it. That's a lot of hope to have to spend, and I'd rather use that hope activating Dragon Breath for multi-target attacks. Anyway, but it's a cool thing, right? And even if we just have to put it in the vault, it'll be there when we need it. At level 8, you get another experience, photographic memory for making decisions. You know, we remember everything we've seen, so when the GM says, you know, here's some words or a piece of a puzzle or whatever, there's a meaningful way that you could say to the GM, well, my character would remember that. And if he says make a roll, you know, burn a hope and use your photographic memory and try to make sure that your character, even if you don't as a person remember, you could say with some legitimacy, my character would remember. Again, role-playing stuff. Level 8, we're going to take proficiency and traits. Guess what? It's the best thing we can do every time we get a new tier. So here we go again. We're going to take Rune Thief. This is the first of our truly broken abilities. And we're going to take Veil of Shadows and put it into the vault. Rune Thief says if we're targeted with magic damage, we figure out how much magic damage that would do to us in terms of hit points. And that many dice go onto the Rune Thief card. We can later use those dice to increase damage that we do back to under the character. In the meantime, once we figure out how many hit points it would do, then the damage is cut in half. So again, if we've stuck with some medium armor, by now let's say we have like a +9 armor, or at least a +7 armor. If you get hit with a big hit of magic damage, let's say it's 42 damage, and it would be a severe hit easily, you know, 3 hit points on your character. Put 3 dice, drop it to 21, use your armor, go below your major threshold, get it down to 2, maybe even get it down to 1 hit point of damage that you actually take after your armor. And I mean, it goes from being a certain 3 hit points of damage to being 1, maybe 2. And in return for that, you're stocking up spell damage. At level 9, we get our proficiency and we'll get our subclass. Now, our subclass says if we take magic damage or if we choose to use hope to charge it up, we become charged. And we can later use that to add +2 proficiency to a damage roll. it's really nice. Now when we get hit with Rune Thief, we reduce the damage, and once we reduce the damage, we stock up those damage dice and also become overcharged and get to do more damage later with Rune Thief and also with +2 proficiency. So with the subclass and Rune Thief, it's getting pretty crazy. Earthquake is a good spell to help set up the party, especially if there's lots of enemies scattered around you. You Earthquake, you hit them all. It does a little bit of damage. It's not that impressive, but it does give them the restrained condition, I think. But it gives your party advantage against them, and that's going to give everybody a D6 on their to hit rolls and all that. So it's pretty strong. Or the GM has to spend a ton of fear to get rid of all these instances of restrain that you've put on all these other characters. So I don't think it's a spell that you're going to use a lot, but when you use it, it should feel pretty powerful. Level 10, we're going to get experience. We're going to max out our Spell Sniper and our Slither, and we're going to take another stress slot here and just have the ability to do more of the stuff we want to do. And then we take the final brokenness, Spectre of the Dark. That allows us to mark a stress and become ghostly. While we're ghostly, we can walk through walls and we're immune to physical damage. Now, it doesn't say at any point that it restricts our character. That's important later. Damage in this range, once we get to our 6 proficiency, we're looking at 68 plus 6 damage. Again, we'll just say we have a legendary dual staff or a advanced dual staff by now, whatever it is. It's 33 average damage. Again, if we use stress, we can target 2 things within far range, and we should pretty reliably be doing 2 hit points with it. Our blood staff at this point, should we choose to use it, is 6d20, which is 63 damage, which is, even at tier 3, pretty reliably going to be 3 hit points against quite a few creatures. Mostly we won't be doing that though anymore. We won't be using that nuke turn like we used to, because we're going to want to save our stress for activations of the ghost ability and things like that. So it'll change around a little bit. We can still have a nuke turn if we want it, but I don't think we'll be wantonly wasting resources very often. Preservation Blast and Elemental Breath now are 6d8, which is 27 damage across a lot of targets. Again, dealing 1 or 2 hit points to 3, 4, 6 targets, however many you can get in range. And then Earthquake, I think it's more about setting up the advantage for your team than it is about doing lots of damage. Okay, so are we indestructible at this point? By this tier, our sorcerer can walk around with impunity, just stride out into the middle of combat as a specter, be completely immune to physical damage, and it doesn't say that we can't act or cast normally, so we're going to be casting spells or using our staff or whatever we want to do. And it lasts for our spell casting ability, which is 5, maybe 6 if we have an ability somewhere that boosts our spell casting. I think the way Arcane Touched is worded, it says it increases your spell casting rolls by 1, but it doesn't say it increases your spell casting trait by 1, I don't think. So maybe it could be 6 minutes if we get our instinct or our insight up to 6, but anyway, 5 minutes is a long time in most every game. So we're immune to physical damage. If we do get targeted with magic damage, remember that's going to hit Rune Thief. We're going to take half damage, charge up the extra dice, and we're going to get charged on our Primal Mastery for another +2 proficiency at some point when we hit. So we can just walk around the battlefield doing literally whatever we want. If we get in a position to do a good Preservation Blast, you add that extra 2 proficiency dice, you're looking at 8d8 for an average of 46 damage to all the targets that you can hit. You can drop, let's say you have 3d6 stacked up on Rune Thief. So you're doing, between 40 and 50 damage to many different targets and scattering them all over the place. And there's not much they can do in return. And again, if they keep targeting you with little bits of magic damage, that's all going to go to Rune Thief. Even if you're only taking 1 hit point or, reducing it with your armor to no hit points, that's going to stack up your Rune Thief pretty crazy. So let's say you just keep doing that and they keep doing magic damage to you, and pretty soon you die. You don't care. It doesn't matter. Arcane Touch says once per short rest you can swap your Hope and Fear die results. So if you die, you just say, okay, I'm going to take the chance death move. I roll the dice. Hey, look, I rolled Hope, so I live. Hey, look, I rolled Fear. Okay, I'll swap the results. Hey, look, I live. Once per short rest, you cannot die. You literally cannot die the first time. If you die twice in the same combat, your combat trick is gone, then you're in trouble, right? So don't get so crazy that you die twice in a row. It might be hard to do, but but yeah, for that first time that you die, the Arcane Touched, swap your die. And there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of times when you might want to use this swap. But I would say knowing that it guarantees that you can't die means that myself as a player, I probably wouldn't use this unless it was the most dire of circumstances. I would just save it and use it whenever I wanted to not die. I guess if you're early in the day and you've got all your resources available to you, you can use this ability to just, succeed with hope instead of fear in a particular combat role. That's fine too. But yeah, this is crazy. So by level 10, we're again, this idea of this arrogant dragon just striding out in the battlefield, holding up the staff, ripping stars down from the sky to knock people out. It's a pretty fun image. It's a high damage character, plenty of stuff to do out of combat. And if you didn't want to do the strength thing, you could easily make finesse your secondary stat and really be the party's rogue as well. You get wall walk, you get the recall abilities and all that stuff, so you could easily be the rogue. The reason I picked strength is because I think this character, again, to optimize your targets and all that in the first couple rounds of combat, you really have to stay mobile, and restrained is therefore the worst enemy of this character. So that's why I put strength. But if you want to do more out of combat stuff, pick finesse, pick presence, whatever you want to do for your secondary stat, and then pick an experience that goes along with that and level up your experience as you go. I think the GM just won't target you. I mean, once you're immune to physical damage and doing magic damage to you makes you far more powerful, I think the GM will just say, Sorcerer's not a target anymore. May as well try to deal damage to the other people in the party. So I think knowing that this is where it was going to end up, that's kind of how I created the character from the start. It's always been this character that just kind of walks around doing whatever she likes and not caring what other people think. And by level 10, that's really the case. All right, so in summary, I think this character is pretty fun and balanced for the first 7 levels, the first 2 tiers. It's a powerful character, does a lot of damage, multi-target damage all over the place. I think it's nice. Once you get past level 8, you start accumulating these abilities and skills that really take the character from what I think is a pretty playable character to being really overpowered. But in terms of the Bloodstaff, I think the Bloodstaff should be a relatively easy item. I don't think the GM should consider it ultra rare. It does give a D20 for damage, but it requires, I mean, even if you're just doing single target damage, it'll take a stress. So I think you have to have a dual staff and a Bloodstaff. If the GM will only ever allow you to carry one primary weapon, then you have to use the Bloodstaff, and then you have to use your spells, use your preservation or your breath weapon or whatever for your normal damage, and only use the Bloodstaff when you have stress to spare. But yeah, I think it's a fair trade-off. The D20s are big damage. They really increase how hard you hit, but having to take a stress every single time you use your weapon is a pretty big drawback. The thing that it does allow, though, again, maybe I'm misinterpreting the rules, but I think if your stress is completely full and you want to use an ability that requires a stress, you can't use it because you don't have an available stress to mark. But with the blood staff, it just says you take a stress whenever you do damage. You're not paying a stress to activate it. It comes after the fact. So basically you would take a hit point of damage. So if your stress is all marked and you still want to use the blood staff, you can still use it. It'll still cause a stress that will roll over to your hit points. So I think in the hands of a sorcerer, the blood staff is an insight weapon, and it fits exactly for what we want to do with this character. And as long as the GM doesn't make it a rare thing, it could be fun to play in the mid-levels. All right, that's going to wrap it up for our sorcerer build. Hope you all enjoyed that. Please remember to hit that like button on the way out. If you didn't hit it on the way in, it does help the channel grow. And you know, I'm an experienced streamer. I've got a different channel. This is a brand new channel for the Daggerheart stuff, so I know how YouTube works. And if you do watch this, I really would appreciate it if you could give me some of the initial likes to get this content pushed out so more people see it. Thank you all for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.